first of all, thank you so much. Dhruv is not here. Thank you to Dhruv and to Nihir and Ankush for inviting us here and on such a topic that, like it's something जिसको अगर मैं उर्दू में कहूँ कि आज एक गाली बन गई है. मुझे बहुत दफ़े ट्विटर पे गाली के ना तौर से कहा जाता है गंगा जमनी आंटी हैं, जैसे कि मतलब कुछ एक गाली का है. But before I start with that and before I ask Dr. Tharoor, I would like to just say a few things. Okay, what is culture? Culture is a system of meanings which helps us to understand and organize our lives. It includes beliefs, it includes values, it includes ways in which we live our life, social structure, our society. It includes humor, literature, all that is part of our culture. And India is a unique civilization society where we have more than 4,600 communities. Multicultural society, जो Ganga-Jamuni जो actually है, I'll come to the Ganga-Jamuni part also. Multicultural society is where there are many communities living, and as I said, India has over 4,600 communities, and each has its own distinct culture, it has its own distinct language, खाना पीना सब कुछ. अभी जैसे हमसे पहले वो मिस्टिक्स थे जिन्होंने गाना गाया, बन्ना बनी गाई उन्होंने राजस्थान के हवाले से. बिल्कुल बगल में ही हमारे हज़रत निज़ामुद्दीन औलिया का कोर्टयार्ड है, and in the beloved's courtyard one of the most popular कव्वालीज़ is मेरे बने की बात ना पूछो मेरा बना हरियाणा है, और यहाँ बना कौन है? रसूल खुदा. तो ये हमारी यहाँ की खूबसूरती है. ये है गंगा जमनी तहजीब. गंगा और जमुना दो अलग अलग नदियाँ हैं. They are goddesses, both have their own iconography. आप किसी भी मंदिर में जाइए, एक तरफ गंगा जी, राइट में गंगा जी होती है, लेफ्ट में यमुना जी होती है, and they are the protective deities of that temple. उसी तरह से गंगा जमनी तहजीब जो है has been a protection for our society and for the land that we live in. हमारी मतलब इतनी चीज़ें हैं जो हमने बोली ठोली 50 कोस में तो बोली बदल जाती है. हम लोग ने एक दूसरे से अडॉप्ट की है, हम मिले हुए रहते हैं. गंगा और जमुना साथ बहती हैं लेकिन संगम होता है. And another thing that people don't realize is that Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb or a syncretic society. Ganga-Jamuni का मतलब syncretism है, multi-pluralism, culturalism जो भी आप कहिए. It does not mean that one culture subsumes the other. It means both have distinct identities. The Ganga and the Yamuna flow separately. As I said, they both have their different iconographies, but they are there together on either side of the door, providing protection. So this is what is multiculturalism, multipluralism और Ganga-Jamuni तहजीब. ये एक रहने का तरीका है, एक lived reality है, और इसका मतलब ये है कि you should provide space for every community to thrive and to preserve their distinct culture and their identity. And मैं थोड़ी देर में आऊँगी to my lived reality, but before that I'd like to ask Dr. Tharoor to talk a bit about his lived reality and the way he perceives our syncretic society.
Right, no, I agree with everything you've said, but I acquired my faith in the Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb far from both the Ganga and the Jamuna.
Yes.
I grew up in Bombay initially, Bombay as it was called, and as a child of parents of a generation, that nationalist generation, that didn't believe in these distinctions of either caste or religion or creed. And it was striking for me that, looking back later in life, that I'd had, because it was Bombay, I suppose, friends of every conceivable religious background coming home to play, and I was never made aware that there was something different about them because of their religion. So when I was thinking back, that my classmates included Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, even Parsis and Jews, because this was Bombay in the 60s. And that sense that ultimately you learn to judge people by other qualities than something that simply inhered in their birth, an identity acquired by them entirely by accident. That was very, very fundamental to who I was as I grew up. And then the second source of my faith in Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb is from my experience of being a Keralite. Because in Kerala, our history is somewhat different from yours in the north. Islam never came by the sword. In fact, all faiths came peacefully because we have these tranquil waters of the Arabian Sea, and the monsoon winds brought these ships over to bring merchants, travelers, traders over to Kerala. They would spend a few months, and then when the winds changed, they'd sail back, leaving, of course, some of the fruits of their human conquest as well behind, and vice versa. In fact, I read somewhere that it is today impossible to tell apart the DNA of anyone from Oman and anyone from Kerala because of 3,000 or 4,000 years of interchange and miscegenation. Even though they are culturally very different and they speak a different language and mutually incomprehensible, they are in genetic terms the same people of all these years of intermixing. And so when the Jews were persecuted, first by the Babylonians who destroyed their first temple, then by the Romans who destroyed their second temple, they came over to Kerala and were welcomed and happily encouraged to settle and live their own lives. No one disturbed them or told them to convert to anything else or whatever. Then when St. Thomas of the Bible, Doubting Thomas, the apostle, showed up on the shores of Kerala, he was welcomed on shore by a flute-playing Jewish girl. And similarly, a few hundred years later, the news of Islam came as news from people whom the people of Kerala had been used to seeing for centuries, in fact, perhaps for a millennium. And these people said, hey, you know what's happening in our part of the world? There's this prophet and he's going around saying these things. And one of our local kings, Teruman Perumal, said, God, this guy sounds interesting, I want to meet him. And he organized a flotilla of 23 ships to sail off to Arabia to meet the prophet. And the amusing thing is, many of the ships didn't make it, of course, and some got moored very close to Indian shores, Lakshadweep and beyond, and some came back. This guy made it. And today, if you go to Oman and south of Salalah, you will find Kerala coconut trees growing that are not native to the Arabian Peninsula. The nuts have been taken by him to keep himself fueled, I guess, on his trip to meet the Prophet. So when, a few decades after the Prophet's time, there were enough Muslims, a chap called Malik Dinar went to the local king and said, look, we need a place to pray. There's just too many of us now, we need a place to worship. And the king said, oh, there's a disused temple, why don't you go and take it? And so the oldest mosque outside the Middle East, outside the Arabian Peninsula, is a disused temple in Kodinallur in Kerala, the oldest mosque outside there. And as you enter, the first thing you see is this gigantic lamp, which is too big to be comfortably moved in, so it's been there. The mosque itself has gone through 5 or 6 renovations and reconstructions, and now features garish LED lights giving you the 5 times of namaz during the day. But this is the history. So when you come with all of this, in Kerala, it was impossible, certainly for a very long time, to tell adherents of one faith apart from another. This has changed with the Gulf boom and the prosperity and the sudden consciousness on the part of many Asian Muslims that the only way to be a good Muslim is to be more Arab, and suddenly that has affected things. I never saw a burqa in Kerala in my entire childhood and growing up. And you can still go to visit Muslim homes, where on the wall you will see a group picture, family picture of the 1960s, and the lady who is now the grandmother of the house is in a regular sari, looking indistinguishable from anybody else. And now it's the granddaughter who's been obliged to cover herself up. And that's a different story. But otherwise, it was very, very much a sense that no one was different from anyone else. No minority had a minority complex, because they all felt equal stakeholders in that society. And so I grew up thinking not only of this as natural, but as desirable, as a better way of being. And so when I did make it to Delhi, finally, high school in Calcutta, college in Delhi, I began to realize that not everyone thought the same way. And that was sobering. Even then, I remember an argument with my then friend, I'm not sure he still is, from his point of view anyway, M.P. Akbar. In the 80s, whenever I visited, we would always have lunch together. He was editing a paper called The Telegraph at the time. And he had written a series of articles about the danger, this was in the first half of the 80s, about the danger of communalism and the threats to secularism. And I said, Henry, surely you can't be serious. This battle was won 20 years, 30 years ago. I've grown up in India, I don't know enough people who think like this and so on. And he said, mark my words. And of course he was right at the time, because it culminated in, as we all know, the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, the Babri Masjid disaster. And suddenly I realized that, yes, maybe the assumptions I'd taken for granted we're no longer so secure. Now, it's a very long answer to a short question, Rana, forgive me. But the fact is that's been the evolution of my understanding. And today, especially in the last decade, there's been a far too heightened consciousness of identity difference, and particularly of religious difference. I can't help feeling, I've had a young Muslim friend tell me that her then 7-year-old son was told by a playmate in the building they were living in, I'm sorry, my parents say I can't play with you because you're a Muslim. And the irony, by the way, is her husband's a Hindu. So the boy is actually half and half. But this half is what defines him in the eyes of the other child's parents. And this is, to my mind, deeply, deeply dismaying, because it suggests to me that a toxin has been injected into the veins of our society that should never have been there in the first place. And that's going to be more and more difficult to get out of it as common sense dawns with time.
आपने कहा कि you gave a very long answer. I'm sure everybody has loved that answer. क्योंकि ये बातें जो है ना ये होती रहनी चाहिए, ये conversations चलते रहने चाहिए. मैं थोड़ा सा कुछ अपने बारे में बताऊं before coming back to Dr. Tharoor. My Nana was the Diwan of Banaras state. और हमारे नाना ही नहीं सिर्फ, many of his ancestors were the Diwans of Banaras state, and it was an accepted fact. काशी नरेश के जो दीवान होंगे वो सैयद कचगांव की सैयद फैमिली से आएंगे. So this is मतलब from the 1830s onward हमारे यहाँ recorded है कि the first one who went इनका recorded was मौलाना गुलशन अली. He was the Diwan of Banaras state. उसके बाद से फिर then the last one was my Nana. हमारे नाना का जो उस वक़्त के काशी नरेश थे, he was 7 years old when he became the काशी नरेश, महाराज विभूति नारायण सिंह. My Nana was not the legal guardian, but he was in the sense because he was Diwan and then he later became the president of the Banaras state, so he was looked after them. आपने इस गंगा जमनी की सब बात हो रही है यहाँ पे. नाना का एक काम था amongst the administration and all other things that he did. One of the things that he did was to ensure a supply of the Ganges water to the little boy who was studying in Mayo College, because the Kashi Naresh could only have a bath or could only drink Ganga Jal. Now this tradition was not only particular to the Kashi Naresh. Akbar से लेके बहादुर शाह जफर तक सबने आप गंगा जल पिया या यमुना का पानी पिया और उसको नाम किया दिया आबे ज़मज़म. Zamzam is the water, that is the spring that is in Mecca. So when they drank this water, आबे ज़मज़म नहीं आ रहा था Mecca. So ज़माने में कोई ऐसी आसानियाँ नहीं थी कि जो आज हैं कि आप कहीं भी बाजार में चले जाइए आपको ज़मज़म के कैंस मिल जाएंगे. उस ज़माने में it was the water of the Ganges and it was the water of the Yamuna, which was pure enough to drink at those days, which was termed आबे ज़मज़म. So why I'm talking of these things is क्योंकि आप एक जो बहुत popular narrative है on social media is कि कितने जुल्म हुए हैं, कितने differences थे, कितने फर्क थे. अगर डॉक्टर थरूर ने बात की कि किस तरह से the Arabs came and the assimilated, बल्कि वो कहलाते ही दूल्हा थे, मोपला, दामाद, bridegrooms. So the sons-in-law of Kerala, तो उसी तरह से there was this assimilation here. But my Nana is the Diwan of the Kashi Naresh. This is something, my aunt is now 88 years old. She lives in Canada. She told me this story. She was 8 years old. Kashi Naresh was in Mayo College. इस वक्त जो रामलीला है, it is a UNESCO certified रामलीला. रामलीला का procession में काशी नरेश would be the lead elephant. वो थे नहीं. And my aunt says that she was 8 years old. She was on one of the lead elephants. And she still remembers, she says उन्होंने कहा जो वो थे महाऊ थे, उन्होंने कहा बीबी को सलाम करो. Now think of this. It's an 8-year-old Muslim girl. There are two things that are being broken here. One is the gender and other is the caste, is the religion. But these are things that were understood. अच्छा वो नहीं है, ये आ गए. So this is the lived reality that we have lived with. This is what we have to keep talking about. We can't give it. That is not an option.
Benares, of course, the masks.
Yes.
For the Ramlila made by Muslim artisans.
Yes, and of course that. So एक जो question एक मेरा आपसे है जब आपने इसकी बात की is Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb नाम तो हमने दे दिया है लेकिन है तो एक reality. It's the way we all live. It's perceived as something very elitist. But जैसे आपने कहा कि रामलीला के जो वो हैं मूर्तियाँ हैं वो मुसलमान बनाते हैं, मुहर्रम के ताज़िए हिंदू बनाते हैं. उनकी जो है गंगा जमुनी तहजीब उनके तो कूट के भरी हुई है. So like I would like you to comment on that. This why this term is called elitist when it is a ground reality for everybody, or was at least.
It is. In fact, if you again, I'm going to keep giving you examples from the south because
Yes, please do.
I think we tend to think of this very much in North Indian terms. In the south, many of you heard about the Sabrimala pilgrimage and the Sabrimala temple. Well, when you climb up the hill to go and offer your respects and your prayers to Lord Ayyappa, before you get there, the first shrine at which you pay respects is a shrine to his Muslim companion, Babar I suppose, but Babar Swami he's called. And you go there, it's a shrine with a simple green cloth, a sword because he was a general, and a mirror, and that's it. There is no other idol out there to worship. But you have to go and pay your respects to Babar Swami. Babar Swami was a general who accompanied Lord Ayyappa in his famous conquest and defense of his kingdom and so on in those days. This is a story that goes back to a little over 1,000 years ago. Or in South Arcot in Tamil Nadu, there is a temple where the temple is to Muttal Ravanan, who is a Muslim figure who is supposed to be the protector of Draupadi. And there he is, with a beard and kumkum and golden ties and so on, and he's known to be, he's supposed to be the Muslim protector of Draupadi. And these are syncretic tales that come from very, very ordinary people's existence. But you've seen historians have now dug up so much material about, for example, some temple gets struck by lightning and the local Muslims rally around to construct it. 1800s, 1700s. These are stories that have been preserved. I remember Shahid Amin talking about Ghazi Mia and how Ghazi Mia was actually a Muslim warrior. But today, the majority of people who worship at his shrine are actually Hindus. And of course, this business of sending chadars to Ajmer Sharif, which so many Hindus, including our Prime Minister, have done, this is something which is all part of this whole experience. I remember hearing, there are two stories which are very similar, but they're both true. One is how the last Nawab of Awadh, of course, Wajid Ali Shah, he was a bit of a Sybarite, and he enjoyed his theatre and dance and music and so on. And he personally directed, apparently, a Krishna Leela every year, at which his wives played the gopis. They danced around Krishna, and he sat there having directed this performance and enjoyed it, which is something hard to believe today, but very true at that time. Another story came from an American pair of historians, Lloyd and Suzanne Rudolph, who were studying Indian sort of social and cultural practices, who came across the story of a Qazi whose daughter was in a school with other children of other faiths and so on, and they were having a performance also of gopis dancing around Krishna, and they told the daughter, sorry, you may be a good dancer, but there's no way I can agree to your dancing in worship of somebody else's God. I mean, that's not acceptable in Islam. You cannot do it. And so the child had to go back to school and tell her teachers what her father said, and maybe the father himself had to explain. The teacher said, simple solution. You play Krishna, and all the others will dance in adoration of you. And that's apparently what happened. The Rudolphs have written this. This is in very many ways a simple lived experience. I mean, I don't know all of you who've graduated from WhatsApp University, or those who are still studying there, but many of us have seen these photographs. Every year you will find somewhere there is a burqa-clad mother walking with a boy dressed up as Krishna, a child, to the school, or some other Hindu figure. And this again is all part of the lived experience of ordinary people in India. And I think it's sad, but more and more people are forgetting this and are dividing themselves on grounds that are utter folly. I mean, when you realize, for example, that where is Nihal? What he's wearing would not possibly have existed before the Muslims came to India. Anything of what he's wearing, right? And the truth is that we dressed differently before the Muslim influence, but then we are now a syncretic culture. I mean, how can we speak of Indian culture without acknowledging the importance of Qawwali? How can you in the north speak of Indian literature without Ghalib's poetry? It's just not possible. It is, you cannot subtract one from the other and still have. There was, I remember about 20 years ago, there was an online poll when online was still all this exciting stuff, to vote the 7 new modern wonders of the world. And of course, all the Indians, and because we are still more numerous than anybody, they all got together and voted for the Taj Mahal, the product of a Mughal emperor on their soil, rather than the greatest Hindu monument that was also in contention, which is Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Because being Indian was more important than being Hindu. I mean, that was again part of. And so the Taj Mahal got elected amongst the 7 wonders on the back of Indian votes, right? And so on and so forth. We can go example after example of the syncretism that's been built into our lives, and of course, we can add to the Ganga and the Jamuna, the Thames as well. It's given us the language we're speaking. It has given us India's national sport, cricket. I mean, right? So you've got all of that too, and India is bound to be, and it thrives best as being all of these things, and not reduced to any one of these things.
You know, I have lived in Kerala. My husband was posted in Cochin, and we also lived in Oman. So I relate to what you're saying. So we lived for 3 years in Cochin and 4 years in Oman.
Look at that.
In Muscat.
What did your husband do in Cochin?
Tata Steel. He was in
Steel.
Tata Steel. In the late 80s, early 90s, we were there. In fact, my son was a year old when we shifted to Kerala, and the first language he learned was Malayalam.
Has he kept it up?
No, now he's forgotten it. But that was the first language. And when after that, we came to Pune, then we went to the Middle East. And so anybody would ask him, where are you from? He would say, I'm from Cochin. And people would look at me and wonder. I said, but you sound so North Indian.
That's the greatness of India. I wish we'd have more and more of those stories.
So, so these are things, and Kerala I can vouch for, because, like there, wherever we went, it was, the sense of being a Malayali that was more important. It was never religion. And, like somebody the other day asked me, कि आप नमाज उर्दू में पढ़ती हैं? मैंने कहा अगर मैं उर्दू में पढ़ूंगी तो केरला में कौन किस नमाज में वो पढ़ेंगे? So I said, you just think of it. I said, like if I'm going to be reciting my namaz in Urdu, what language is? I said, and if Urdu is really a Muslim language, as everybody keeps calling it, I said, why don't the people, Muslims of Tamil Nadu speak Urdu, or why don't the Malayalis from Kerala speak Urdu, or they speak their language? Bengali speak, Bangladesh में Bangla बोली जाती है, even though they're all Muslims. And एक्चुअली जो उर्दू को अपनी नेशनल लैंग्वेज बना के बैठे हुए हैं पाकिस्तान, वहाँ तो पंजाबी बोलते हैं, वहाँ उर्दू बोलते ही नहीं है, उर्दू हम बोलते हैं. एंड उर्दू, as I always keep saying, is ज़बानें जो होती हैं वो कम्युनिटीज़ की होती हैं, वो रिलीजन्स की कभी नहीं होती हैं. No religion, no language belongs to religion, it belongs to communities. और उर्दू तो हम जहाँ बैठे हैं यहीं पे पैदा हुई है, खड़ी बोली जाती थी इस एरिया में. हज़रत अमीर खुसरो जब मतलब here everybody knows about it, एक बाहर एग्जिबिशन भी लगी हुई है. That one of the major ways of like taking the message of Sufism forward, and this I researched a lot, especially Kerala and on the states actually when I was writing my book on Sufism in Search of the Divine. तो उसमें के लोग खड़ी बोली में कव्वाली और ये जो कह मुकदमी और ये सब दोहे और सब हज़रत अमीर खुसरो ने लिखे हैं, वो written at the request of हज़रत निज़ामुद्दीन औलिया. वो said उस ज़बान में लिखो जो ज़बान लोग सुनते हैं, जो समझते हैं. तो अगर किसी से उर्दू पैदा हुई है या कहीं उर्दू का नाम तो हमेशा हिंदी था, उर्दू तो नाम अंग्रेज़ों ने दे दिया, लेकिन जो हिंदी जिसको हम आज उर्दू कहते हैं वो हिंदवी थी. हिंदवी तो पैदा यही हुई है जहाँ हम बैठे हैं, बिल्कुल इसी इलाके में. और उसके बाद जो during the reign of Muhammad Shah, the Persian as a court language started declining, and Hindi as the court language, written in the Perso-Arabic script, started, becoming more and more popular. Now, by Hindi, I don't mean the Hindi we are speaking today, because today the Hindi we speak is very Sanskritized. So it was called the Zabane-Urdu-e Molla. Urdu-e Molla was the exalted, fort or the camp. वहाँ से वो ज़बान उर्दू मोहल्ला से जब post 1857, one of the the divide and rules was also the fallout was also the language.
Absolutely.
And it's the same time that the printing press came. After that, Bibles were being printed, other religious books were being printed. What was printed in Devanagari was Sanskritized. what was printed in Perso-Arabic script had more Persian in it. Now यहाँ से divide शुरू होता है of a language which is Urdu, आप उसको Perso-Arabic script में लिख रहे हैं तो मुसलमान पढ़ेंगे. एक language है जिसमें आप संस्कृत ज़्यादा डाल रहे हैं, देवनागरी में लिख रहे हैं, वो हिंदू पढ़ेंगे. So this is how languages were divided. But जिसको उन्होंने कहा ना एक बार अशर ने कि क्यों मुझको बनाते हो तासुब का निशाना, मैंने तो खुद को कभी मुसलमान नहीं माना. So that is Urdu, and that is that language is something that like unites us all. जैसे फिराक गोरखपुरी ने कहा ना कि सरजमीने हिंद पे अक़वाम आलम के फिराक, सरजमीने हिंद पे अक़वाम आलम के फिराक, काफले आते गए बसते गए हिंदुस्तान बसता गया. So लोग आते गए बसते गए और हिंदुस्तान बनता गया. As I said, it is a civilization society. And that is something that we need to keep talking about. I'm so happy Nan is there and Dr. Tharoor है, who is such a popular voice. तो ये message और बहुत दूर तक पहुँचेगा. आप जब आप इस उसको.
But I think when we say these things, we're essentially accused of a kind of nostalgia, as it were, for a world that is slipping away. And the question really is more for the young people sitting here, and I see quite a few of the generation that will inherit this mess, is how they're going to fight to keep this kind of common sense alive. Because sadly, there are a lot of people who have begun to think in these terms largely because that vocabulary of difference is around them all the time. And we hear too much of it. I'm hearing things being said fairly publicly and even declaimed from political platforms that I wouldn't have heard behind closed doors when I was growing up in Bombay in the 60s or even in Delhi in the 70s. So there is a change, and the question is how do we reverse that change? Consciousness is part of it. Awareness, just realizing. I mean, you can't go around wearing a version of Muslim dress and being anti-Muslim. Take your sherwani off, for God's sake, or whatever. I mean, at some point you've got to understand that all of this is part of the shared experience.
So I would bring up for the ये सब के लोगों के लिए, and from your experience, how do we fight this growing polarization?
Well, I think frankly the challenge has got to be now to reduce the polarization in every sense. It's not just religious. Certainly the religious polarization is bad in the north. But it's also political now. It's also more and more a sense that we don't make common cause as Indians. We identify each other by whatever, religion or caste or political allegiance, and then you're no longer just an adversary or a rival, you're an enemy. That's really damaging. I think we really, if we don't do something to try and bring, for example, the elements of the Hindutva movement closer to an awareness of the Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb, we lose out, and we lose out as a culture, as a society, and as a country with a future. Because my worry remains that there could be no limit to the bottom, to the depths we can plumb. But I'm encouraged when I see the head of the RSS saying stop looking for shivlings under every mosque, which is so necessary to come from him. It's easy for you or me to say, but we need people who deeply have sort of drunk at the fount of Hindu Rashtra and Hindutva belief to recognize these differences. And I think we need Muslims also to recognize. There were some very impassioned speeches last night. We had this marathon session in Parliament that went on till 3 o'clock in the morning. But there were some very powerful speeches by Muslim MPs, essentially directly addressing the other side and saying, don't think of us as your enemies. We are the ones who stayed. We are the ones who love this country. To build it up, and I think it's extremely important to underscore these messages. I still believe convergence is possible. We just need to keep talking to them, and we need to help get them to see more and more of this. There have been some steps back, which is unfortunate. I'm dismayed when I see, for example, that for the first time in our history as an independent nation, we have a ruling party without a single elected Muslim MP or MLA in any legislature, in the state or national. And that's very dismaying. We do need, I think, in many ways to recognize, yes, there may be an extremist fringe in every faith. And that's true across the board. It's true of Muslims, of Hindus, of Christians, and so on. There'll always be people who are attracted by the fundamentalist aspects of their faith and become fanatics about it, who may even be willing to harm and attack and kill for it, in every faith. But we have to surely highlight the much larger numbers of people who would rather coexist in peace, and tell their stories, encourage their cooperation. And there's always good news. If we read our newspapers diligently, you always find good news once in a while. There'll be this, I think, last week's story in the Indian Express was of a wedding in Kerala, where a Muslim family had brought up a Hindu child and given her away in a temple wedding to another Hindu of her choice. And this was despite the fact that they had adopted this child as a baby. They brought her up as a Hindu. There are such stories, and we need to highlight them more and more. There were temples that threw open their grounds for iftar parties in Kerala. I'd love to see that happening in North India too. I don't see why not. These things can be done. I think we can reach out much more to each other, but we need to both do it and show it. It needs to be seen to be done,
yes,
so that the example can spread.
There was this beautiful story also about a group of Hindus in Jaipur who showered flower petals on
Right.
Muslims who were going to the Eidgah. We need more, as you said, we need more of these. हम लोग हैं, we are a group of about 8 women. Every year we hold interfaith iftar parties.
Wow.
And not just interfaith iftar parties, we hold interfaith festivals. So iftar parties, what we do is we invite people across, across class and area. और उसमें शर्त ये होती है, हर होस्ट जो है लाइक वी कुक ourselves, उसमें हम खुद खाना पका के लाते हैं हम लोग, एंड उसमें शर्त ये है कि जिसको हम इनवाइट करेंगे should be a non-Muslim who has never gone to a Muslim house, so that we call them and show them how normal we are, जैसे और कि हम भी बस आप ही के जैसे हैं, कोई फर्क नहीं है. So the first one that this is where we've come to, but क्या करें, हमको ये करना पड़ता है. So क्योंकि that otherization is happening, so to stop the otherization. So I remember the first iftar we did, there was this lady with whom I've actually traveled also, and I've done a lot, I've been good friends with her. And जब नमाज का वक्त आया तो she asked me, आपा मैं यहाँ बैठ के, अच्छा everybody calls me आपा for some reason, तो she asked me, आपा मैं यहाँ बैठ के देख लूँ आपको नमाज पढ़ते हुए. मैंने कहा जरूर देखो. तो she saw and then she later on commented, she said, she said कि इबादत सबकी एक ही सी होती है, सब इंटरप्राइज करते हैं, आंखें बंद की हैं आपकी, हमारी भी बंद होती हैं. So when there is more give and take and there is more, आपस में हम मिलते रहेंगे, तो ये सब चीजें जो है बढ़ती चली जाएंगी. Then we have Teej celebrations, where we have Diwali celebrations, and उसमें हम फिर उन लोगों को बुलाते हैं जिन्होंने कभी शायद तीज ना देखी हो, जिन्होंने कभी दिवाली ना देखी हो. So this is a very small effort on our part, because we have, our houses are not big enough to accommodate more than 40 or 50 people. But that's what we are trying to do, and we are doing this in not only in Delhi but in many other cities as well. And we have been wanting to do something that was done in New York a few years ago called Open a Mosque. So you open mosques, and we are trying to get some mosques where you open the mosque, you invite people to come and ask us questions. जैसे वो अकबर का था ना, उन्होंने रामायण और महाभारत इसलिए ट्रांसलेट करवाई, because he said it's only ignorance which leads to distrust between communities. So हमीदा बानो बेगम जो बिल्कुल बगल में ही हमारे सो रही हैं, वो उनकी अपनी पर्सनल रामायण की कॉपी थी पर्शियन में, और आप पे रंग पड़ जाता है, ऐसा कोई उसमें कुछ नहीं है. तो जो बाबा बुल्ले शाह कहे ना कि होली खेलो कह के बिस्मिल्लाह, रंग पड़ जाता है धो लो. The only thing, the only issue with the color is that when you do your wuzu or your ablution, there should be nothing on your skin. I wash my cream off also before I do my wuzu. रंग पड़ा है, धो लो उसको, धो के wuzu कर लो. Why miss out on a beautiful festival? So I kept telling people, and that do not worry if color is thrown on you. You can always go and wash it off. Do not get provoked. Stay restrained. So somebody said, this is you are asking the victim to bed. I said no, I am trying to advocate कि जब माहौल गर्म होता है ना, तो थोड़ा सा एक तरफ ठंडा होना जरूरी होता है, फिर बाद में फिर वो नॉर्मलाइज हो जाता है. बट अगर हरी की ईगो आ जाएगी और सभी सर पे चढ़ जाएंगे कि बस लड़ने मरने पे तैयार है, तो फिर गुंजाइश नहीं बनती. It's all about accommodation. Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb is about, I think, accommodation.
So if you look at Kerala again, sorry, last example. Onam, which is our very, very big, which is Diwali, Christmas and Holi combined, right? I mean, for us it's the biggest thing. And it's a festival that all three communities, Hindus, Muslims and Christians, celebrate together. And it's all about, dressing up, giving each other gifts, massive feasts, all of this stuff. And people do it. Now, what's happening in recent years is, yes, there is a certain amount of fundamentalism creeping in. There are some imams who are telling their followers, no, it's un-Islamic to celebrate Onam. So maybe 5%, maybe 10%, maybe the number's growing. But how do we now manage to tell everyone that this is a celebration of your society, your culture, and it has nothing to do with an attack on your religion? This notion of what is un-Islamic is becoming potentially a problem as well. We haven't yet got to a stage, thank God, where any Hindu, we don't have Maulvis in Malaya, so it's slightly safer that, but any Hindu priest or sadhu has declared that it's un-Hindu to go off to an iftar or go and wish somebody on Eid. That hasn't happened yet. But I think we need to start now encouraging within each faith and this is where the within each faith argument comes in, that ultimately I can never say something to a Maulvi that you can say as a believer, or perhaps again, it would depend on the Maulvi whether he's willing to listen to a woman. But that's another question, because that's also part of the challenge. It seems to me so important that we now start pushing these narratives up our own place. Certainly, when I mentioned earlier the need for convergence, I do feel it would be a mistake to just write off the other side as incorrigible and treat them as enemies. Because we're making the same mistake then that we've allowed them to do to us. I think what we should do is say, let's listen to what your problem is. What is your issue? And let's try and find some meeting, because there is meeting ground. And increasingly I've talked to people of the Hindu families, and I've said, I'm Hindu, and you tie a Muslim to a tree and flog him until he says Jai Shri Ram, and you actually flog him to death. That actually happened in a notorious incident in Bihar. I said, that's not my Hindu dharma. And you won't find a Hindu person defending it. They also know, ye hamara bhi dharma nahi hai. Aisa nahi hona chahiye. So why don't you say it? You work in that ecosystem, you say it. If you denounce it, then perhaps the people who've done this will not be inclined to do it again. There are criminal elements in everything. Let's engage with people who represent in some ways what we've thought of as a side we can't talk to. Let's talk to them and bring them along. And that applies across the board. I've had, I was a very strong opponent of the CAA, and I was the first politician to speak in what bar was it? My gosh, I'm having a senior moment. The street protest site, I was grandma. So there I was, and so on. And then when I went to Jamia, there was a group of Muslim hotheads who objected to my coming to address them. Because one of my messages was, don't protest as Muslims, protest as Indians. What's wrong with this law is that it challenges your rights as Indian citizens. If that is the basis of your protest, all of us will stand with you. If you start making it all about Islam, then how does a non-Islamic person be of any use to you? Well, this ought to be our common fight. So that was the issue on which they disagreed with me. So I realized that you can't win them all. And there will always be people of other views, but talk to each other. That's the best we can do.
And should we open the floor for questions? Anyone has any questions? This side, I'm sorry, हमारी इधर पीठ थी. आप आगे आ जाइए इधर. Anyone who has questions, please come here.
Clarification to make so this.
Hi. Can I ask a question? This is for Mr. Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, hello.
Hi.
How the last bit that you just discussed, we were also part of the NRCCA. The fact is that at the Jamia Islamia, many students said that, precisely to your point, that actually it was more important for them to take ownership of the fact that they were the victims as Muslims. It wasn't just, I understand the idea that a non-Muslim, how do I get the umbrella that's big enough that I can come in? But I said, look, if you tell me I should just protest as an Indian, then you're taking away the particularity from which I'm being targeted. I'm being targeted as an Indian Muslim. So
why do you want to let those who are targeting you define who you are, the purpose of your
Well, they already have, right? At the end of it, by targeting, they said, I'm claiming it back. So a lot of them were saying, if I get strength, that it's not, let's say, charged.
Let me be very blunt, sir, and say that you double down on your Muslim identity. Your protests consist of readings from the Quran and prayers and so on. Aren't you actually reinforcing the stereotype of you as the other that the bad guys are trying to perpetrate? Should you not have a better chance of success in winning non-Muslim adherence to your protest by showing them, I'm not the other, I am one of you. You are like me. We have the same rights. We're born on the same soil. We're citizens of the same country. That to me would have been a far more effective protest than one that simply reinforces the stereotype that the other side is trying to paint about you.
The last point I'll say
No,
on that,
It's all right. I think this is
if I may,
instructive.
one last bit. At that moment, people didn't mention in the group that as an Indian Muslim, I am not responsible for your or the majority's prejudice or for reinforcing or not. I want to be able to claim it as an uncharged identity, an identity that perhaps does not carry the baggage. I want to be able to say that the freedom fighters of this country were also as much Hindu as Muslim as others.
That's right.
So therefore, why should I be able to not be able to take my identity central point to my like let's say I'm from Punjab, right? So can a Sikh, my Sikh brother here, can he not claim and say no, I should not be charged or looked at as a Khalistan movement, whatnot. I want to be strong in my Sikh identity, as let's say you in the Hindu identity or Muslim identity.
We should all be secure in whatever identities we wish to profess, which by the way can vary from occasion to occasion in my view. My Sikh friend might be proudest at a particular moment in the Gurudwara or at the Langar of being a Sikh. But in a different moment, he might be proudest of being from St. Stephen's College. He might be proudest of being a cricket fanatic cheering his team on. I mean, our identities are mutable in that sense. But my argument is that in the particular context of what you are fighting, which assertion will serve the purpose you want of actually winning the day? And my argument, which I still believe is the right one, is an argument anchored in issues of Indian citizenship. Why do you have Hindu sort of poets standing up in Bombay saying, Kagaz nahi dikhayenge? Even Kagaz dikhaya, nahi dikhaya, they're safe in this country. But they're saying it in solidarity with those who, because they're Muslims, might be obliged to show their Kagaz. This is the sort of different, to my mind, they're entitled anytime they want to claim to be who they are, that's fine. But in this particular context of a protest which is trying to change a political decision, you're far better off arguing, it seems to me, an argument that would resonate with those who have the power to change the
You're
decision.
the Martin Luther King. I am not the Malcolm X. So let's leave it at that.
Okay, come.
very quick.
Please keep the questions very short, so that everybody, those who want to ask can get a chance.
Dr. Tharoor, this is not really a question. This is something what you've been calling lived reality. What do we say? Lived. So my father gave me this huge gift. I belong to Marwar. I was married into a Baniya family, and I called my father Abba. You can imagine how mischievously my eyes would light up when I would see the total confusion on anyone's face, because my surname would be either a Choria or a Mittal, but I would say Abba Bulane. So it was one of the nicest ways, I think, to live this Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb and to celebrate every single song festival and earn lots of Eidi and lots of Mithai on the one. So Abba lives forever. I have a page called Abba Speak in which I write his anecdotes, things that he's taught me while we lived. We lost him in COVID at the age of 93. So that was a life long lived, and a life lived when they were fighting for independence and they ran to get the laddus when independence was got. And Abu lives forever. And other family members have also taken it. It's a very sweet sounding word. It doesn't matter what your surname is. That's all.
You want to ask?
Lovely, thank you.
Keep it short, huh? Come, idhar aa jao, sir.
Good evening, Rana and Shashi Tharoor. My question is to you, Rana. I'm a huge fan of yours. And just 2 days
So
back.
am I read every week.
And just 2 days back, we were there at Rana's Eid dinner party, and my question is related to that. Rana, how do you think food brings people together across cultures? So it's related to your Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb.
You know, Payal told me, and Payal and Shruti, they are my young neighbors. They said, Rana को please मुझे डॉक्टर थरूर से मिलवा देना. सवाल तो मुझसे पूछ लिया, मैं तुम्हें इनसे सवाल पूछो, कभी भी पूछ लेना. मुझे तो घर में कभी भी पूछ लेना. But as far as food is concerned, food जलेबी कहाँ से आई, समोसा कहाँ से आया सर? समोसे में सिर्फ मतलब लालू जी नहीं है, समोसे में जो आलू है वो भी हिंदुस्तानी है, लेकिन समोसा बाहर से आया था. समोसा कीमे का आया था बाहर से और यहाँ पे उसमें आलू मिला के हमने उसको अपना कर लिया. जलेबी जलाबिया करके आई थी, उसको हमने जलेबी बना के अपना कर लिया. तो फूड इज सच अ बिग यूनाइटिंग फैक्टर. आप चाहे वो यू नो लाइक curries have now become the national dish of Britain. तो वो चटनी मैरी and all these, you know, so food is a very big unifier and हर चीज़ जो है वो हम अपना बना लेते हैं. अच्छा, he's been asking for a long time. इसके बाद आप.
Alright, yes. Good evening to everyone. Namaste. It's really good time, and I'm also in the mood. It's 9 p.m. It's the time I watch the news, and currently I'm witnessing it indirectly live. My question is actually to both of you regarding one statement that both of you made to Ms. Rana. I would say that I would want to ask that you said the Persian Arabic texts were Sanskritized, and there were some texts that were turned to Urdu, and this was the start of the language divide. There were some texts that were Sanskritized, Persian and Arabic texts. The Hindi we speak today is not actually the Hindi, it has been Sanskritized. And if it has been Sanskritized, when did Sanskritization like this began? And which texts were those that were Sanskritized from Persian to Indo-Ized Hindi? Should I go for him as well?
आप मैं जवाब दे दूँ फिर आप नहीं जो मैंने अर्ज किया था was that when the printing press came, books that were being written in Devanagari had more Sanskrit words. Books that were being printed in Perso-Arabic script had more Persian scripts, and that is where the division of the language began. ये ज़बान जो थी हमेशा हिंदवी ही कहलाई थी और इसको उर्दू का ज़बान, as I said, it was called the ज़बान उर्दू है मोहल्ला. It was not उर्दू ज़बान, it was ज़बान, language of the exalted court, which got the word Urdu. So ये तो मेरा आपका जवाब हो गया. अब आप सब डॉक्टर थरूर से सवाल
In fact,
पूछिए.
as I understand, Ranaji, the language began in the military camps.
Not really.
Isn't that where the word
No,
Urdu came
not
from?
in the military camps. It began in the court. It was
Really?
Muhammad Shah who was, you know, like Muhammad Shah, Shah Alam. They used to write a lot of Braj poetry, and it's all been
So Braj
published.
Bhasha, Maithili,
Braj Bhasha
all
में-
that, and Bhojpuri and so on got fed
Khadi-
into this. And that the accretion, so the grammatical structure came from these older indigenous languages, and Turkish, Arabic, Persian words came in because these soldiers from those countries were mixing with the soldiers from our. So in the military camps, they had no choice but to invent a common form.
Not just the military camps, the court itself also.
And,
Because the
and
court
then could it
also-
have graduated to the court from there? No?
Dr. Professor Shamsul Rahman Faruqi has contested this. Has contested this. So he has said, you know, like it was some much more organic. It started. It was there also in the army, but court में था. And उसके अलावा क्या कहते हैं, मैं क्या कह रही थी, लेकिन एकदम दिमाग से निकल गया.
Also, right up to the 1940s and 50s, people in some states learned Urdu rather than. I mean, I had the great privilege once of sitting behind Dr. Manmohan Singh during his Red Fort address on Independence Day, and I was amazed to see him turning the pages this way because he was reading from left to right. So he wasn't going this way; he was going this way, and that was because he was reading in the Urdu script as a script he learned.
मैंने ना कोविड के ज़माने में फारसी सीखने की बड़ी कोशिश की, and everybody told me आपको उर्दू आती है, फारसी तो बहुत आसान होगी, but you know, फारसी has a very special grammar which is very difficult to learn. Urdu की grammar is Hindi की grammar, because that's what the local grammar is. So it is that. So for me, like Farsi still after so many years of work in progress, because the grammar is so very difficult. So Urdu has an Indian, the grammar is Hindi, Sanskrit, the language that was called Hindi. And ये जो एक सवाल और आपने पूछा, Fort William जब बना था, so there was this book called मीर अमान करके एक थे, उन्होंने किताब क्या लिखी थी मैं भूल रही हूँ exactly नाम. You will find it there in my blog, on my blog ranasafvi.com. There is a essay called My Name is Urdu and I am not a Muslim. आपको उसमें सब details मिल जाएंगे.
Thank you so much. It's like really a dream come true listening from both of you. And I graduated, like I just graduated, given my final semester exam. I'm yet to receive my undergrad degree. But like giving a question to you, you mentioned that today, and I quote, the last 10 decades, there has been a far too high consciousness that a Muslim friend of yours told you that his parents denied. A Muslim friend of yours told you that his parents denied not to play with others because he is a Muslim. And
the Muslim friend's child was told by a playmate from the same building of his age, my parents say I can't play with you because you're a Muslim. So obviously his parents were Hindus.
Yes. This was, you referred to this as a toxin injected in society. I completely accept it. But don't you see such type of, because you have also experience in diplomacy, UN, don't you see this divide has been growing up all across the world? We see Donald Trump and Elon Musk, that's what they are trying to do, make America great again.
That isn't a good thing. Yeah, there is much more identity consciousness than ever. For my great sins, I had to be the person of the United Nations who handled the civil war in the former Yugoslavia. I've seen the horrors that can happen when a society that was living in ethnic coexistence and harmony gets ripped apart. And I don't want to see that happening in my country at any price, right? So I've seen this. I've had people on the one hand refusing to identify themselves by the ethnic affiliation, saying that they are Yugoslav and that's what they are. But there are others. I've sat with a man who was sort of with complete incomprehension, saying the neighbor to whom I would entrust my keys when my family went off to the coast for a summer vacation, that's the neighbor who has raped my daughter. Now, how does a human being come to terms with that? Why is the man's bestiality out? Because this guy's a different religion and that guy's a different religion. And therefore it's fair game to do all this when you have a breakdown in society. In many ways, human beings are capable of the worst bestiality. And having seen this in all my years of service around the world, I believe that it's the duty. First of all, I believe it's the purpose of civilization to control our worst instincts. Well, those worst instincts are there. And it's the duty of those who are in responsible positions to ensure we keep a lid on those worst instincts. The politicians who are playing with fire are the ones who are deliberately stoking these identity conscious differences for the purpose of votes. Because from there it's one step towards hatred for the other and two steps towards violence against the other. And that will destroy our country. It's as simple as that. For me, what is essential is to recognize what we have in common while accepting that we may have different things that we might not share directly with each other. But they don't have to be matters that we judge each other for. That's the essential difference.
Can you just stand up so that
Yeah, just stand up, your voice will be projected more.
I don't need So, I'm from North Delhi. I studied in Jamia. I've seen the cultures coexist so beautifully. I've attended star parties, and I know that this culture doesn't even need proving.
Yeah.
Like, this dialogue shouldn't have even existed. Like, but when you pull out articles, when you try to read about it on the internet, when you pull out articles, some cultural activists, as they may call themselves, they even go to the extent of calling it like a civilizational wound, like a hoax, this theory. So how do you protect the future generation? Our children are gonna be reading and they are being fed with this toxicity and they don't know much. There's not, they will be only reading and they'll be fed with all this toxicity. So what is your message to the younger generation? How do you protect them from being misled in an environment like this?
It's not an easy answer to give because it requires a whole complex of behaviors and assumptions and attitudes. To my mind, one thing that is very, very clear is that in the North, there are many who have, if you like, a historical chip on the shoulder. And you can keep grating away at that chip until your shoulder starts bleeding, which is what some people are busy doing. Or you can say what's happened has happened, I'll now put a padding on top of that chip and I'll move on. The problem is that many were doing the latter, but we've been pulled back to the former. One of the things, for example, about history, we have to acknowledge, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that yes, at various times, there were Muslim rulers, conquerors, some looters, some who came to stay, who did violence and damage and loot and so on, and destroyed temples. There were some temples, beyond a shadow of a doubt, where mosques were deliberately built on top. Now, it would be wrong of us to deny those historical facts, but it would be even more wrong to try 300 years later, 400 years later, 500 years later, to quote, revenge yourself upon history by punishing people who had nothing to do with those original offenses. And that, unfortunately, is what happened during the whole Babri Masjid business in the aftermath of it. And it's what some are attempting to do now. I am 100% convinced that the story of Kashi Vishwanath is adequately documented, that there is no debate. That was deliberately ordered by Aurangzeb. And it actually was because the main sponsor of the Kashi Vishwanath understood at that time, Man Singh had fallen out of favor in his court. So you actually had a dispute within the court that led to an action against a temple. But it's silly for us now to pretend. The question to ask is, do you want to do violence to the social harmony that currently exists in Banaras? Do you want to hurt, offend, and wound the people who are now worshipping in that mosque and have been doing so for 300 years in order to prove some point about history? Well, leave history in its own place. History is its own revenge.
History is called history for a reason.
That's right.
But see, you can't judge something that happened 300 years ago today with when there was no democracy, there was no sense of a nation. So you can't judge that in today's context.
I just needed a very quick clarification of the terminology Ganga-Jamuni. Is it a more generic overarching term for any multiculturalism, or has a very specific connotation to Hindu-Muslim? Is what I really
Specifically Hindu-Muslim.
Yeah.
In India, that's the understanding.
आप क्या कहते हैं इस हमसे पहले ना हम लोग दुपट्टे पहनते थे बचपन में अभी पहनते हैं मतलब I have it शादी में which has silver and golden lace in it लचका. It's called Ganga-Jamuni lace. When we go to the shop, we'll see Ganga-Jamuni जो लचका दिखाई है. So it's a जो मिश्रण होता है जिसको उर्दू में वो हिंदी में कहेंगे ना या हिंदी उर्दू में कहेंगे, that is what is Ganga-Jamuni, that the मिलना, the संगम. So आप एक दो ये है एक ये है. I think 3 questions and then
आप दोनों ही विद्वानों से सुन के बहुत सीखने को मिला आज. एंड आपने जितना लिखा है उससे सैकड़ों गुना पढ़ा होगा. So for the young minds, one book that you would recommend to start reading on the Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb.
As simple as that.
Okay. I am going to plug my own book and search about it.
I was going to suggest it to you exactly that.
Makes perfect
Because
sense.
in Search of the Divine, I have traced everything starting with Kerala and how the Muslims came and how they lived here. किस तरह से सारे जो सूफी संत थे उन्होंने और भक्ति सेंट्स किस तरह से सब लोगों ने एक मिलजुल के एक तहजीब बनाई. उन्होंने कहा ना कि सरजमीन है हिंद में अक़मा में, तो वो किस तरह से हुआ. So that is something I have described in that, and I'm sure Dr. Tharoor can recommend one of his books.
I must admit that I'm tempted also to plug one of my books, but not because it describes the Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb particularly, but describes the political arguments around it at the time of partition and independence. It's a book called The Battle of Belonging, which is about what it means to be an Indian, patriotism, nationalism, all of those good things. So I would recommend that.
And apart from that, Dr. Richard Eaton's India and the Persianate Age.
Hi, I'm Maisa. Dr. Tharoor, this is for you. So this is not exactly a question, it's an observation and analogy. So when Hannah Arendt was covering Eichmann's
Banality of evil.
banality of evil, when we talk about lynching and flogging, And currently, like we're talking about acute consciousness of your identity, right? In this case, when there's lynching happening or when there's flogging happening, and you said no Hindu would rise up and say, I believe that my faith allows this kind of behavior and torture to somebody or torment to somebody else. But here we don't have a face. Here evil is faceless. No individual owns up to this. This is a communal identity that has been created. And it is not, even back then, what Arendt said was that the entire system in Germany, the whole bureaucracy which executed the Holocaust, they did not believe in what was happening. They did not believe or they did not hate the Jews. They did it because they normalized the hatred towards the Jews. And I feel that that is what is happening currently. It's not that people are hating on a different community. It's that they're normalizing the hatred around them for a different community. So that is something that I've come to realize with everything I hear and I've read.
So what's the answer, young lady?
Not the answer. There's no answer to me yet, but I believe. So I don't think there's an answer because it's come a full circle. Back then the Jews were executed. Today they are, bombing Gaza flat, and this has come around after a lot of years, 50 odd years. But I don't see that if there was an answer, it has backfired. Not that it has actually given a result, a good one at least. So I don't see if there's an answer. What I see is a circle, more of a vicious circle.
But that plays into the Hindutva argument. They said we got lasted for centuries, now it's our turn to blast these.
So but that plays into the Muslim argument and the Jewish argument as well. It's not a fair argument because it is not justifying anybody's cause and it's only causing torment to somebody else.
Thank you very much. Quick observation as a consummate musician. The doyen that's behind us, Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab, used to start with Saraswati Vandana, which Zakir Hussain himself talks about. As somebody in the technology space, I think one observation I don't, or one sort of way of conversation I don't see happening around this topic is I think we have unarguably moved to a new age where the speed of information that we digest and share has been the highest that humans have ever seen. And it is so recent that its effects have not been studied. And in fact, that has a direct perception on identity. So TikTok, for example, having face, cleanup changes the identity of women. They find that now. So, right, because you start to see yourself in a fairer look, and then you hate your identity when you look in the mirror in the real world without makeup. So the fact that you have filters on all the face apps, Instagram and all that, warps your perception of your own body and your own identity. Right. And so in fact, because identity has to be small and fungible, right? In Rang they say, Gokul dekha, Mathura dekha, Tosa Rang na dekha. But, and in Hinduism, you have no identity. You've shed your identity and your ego in order to then see everybody as the same. But then on the other hand, we live in a paradigm where our identities are getting stronger and more sort of insidious because of the never before seen sort of paradigm we live in. I think there's, in that case then, unlike 1,000 years ago, where information would reach slowly, action, the loop is much slower. Right, which leads to a different way of having conversations and a different way of approaching the problem. In fact, we probably are never going to be able to solve it the same way with just conversation. So have you guys seen any sort of thinking around how we approach this line of thinking?
I think we should leave it to the younger generation that understands the uses and misuses of technology better than ours does. I think this is interesting, and that was a fascinating story about this person who lived entirely in an alternative universe. Literally, these virtual reality thing. Yes. You go and you pay for some tokens, and then you have a totally different. And that's the only life they wanted. They were a different personality. They did that, and it was 18-hour days for them in this other make-believe world that only exists in cyberspace. And I guess in some ways this is the kind of danger. But then what do? How do we invent games that promote communal harmony and try and market those to young people instead of games where people are busy slaughtering each other? I don't know. You tell me. I'd love to see more of these things coming out through technology. Worry increasingly is that technology serves more to distract than to actually unify or promote any causes. But
it's called the great amplifier. It amplifies whatever is more than us.
also technology makes you more and more of a loner. And we have, we've started living in silos, as Dr. Tharoor said, games are violent. We get more points for banging cars than for saving lives. And we are, sitting alone in our room. अब वो नानी दादी के ज़माने गए जो कहानियाँ हमको कमरे में की सुनाती थी. अब now parents are working, grandparents are also working, and so we are sitting all kids. We've outsourced our kids to technology, unfortunately.
That's right.
And they are just playing, violent games, or they are on internet, or they are on social media, or somewhere where they are being fed hatred. So this is something that has to be done by everybody at their level, by young parents, by making sure. Like I know so many nieces and all who limit internet time. They don't give the phone or the iPad to the child, or even if they don't give it, they will give it without Wi-Fi, so that they can only play the games that they have downloaded from them. That is something all of us have to do individually, because we are destroying our children. There's no two ways about it.
I'm going to take the prerogative as the host, but
No, I just have a question. As a politician, how do you think we people, like I'm a journalist, how can I, stop politicians from, creating this politics of fear, from spreading this politics of fear?
By reporting it.
Yeah, but even people report it and it gets backfired. Is there a safer way to do it? There is no safer way to do it, right?
There's no perfect solution. I mean, the fact is that when politicians say these absolutely inflammatory and irresponsible things, if there's evidence reported by a journalist, brought one day in the form of an FIR to a police station and brought to court, it'll show them. Look at this chap now who's a minister in the Delhi government who made inflammatory speeches over the Delhi riots. He's having a heck of a time because he's before the courts. There's demands for his resignation as a minister because he's being charged, etc. So ultimately, making society aware of wrongdoing can never be, it seems to me, a failure. It's your basic job as a journalist, and if you do that, my worry is more that more of you will be censored from doing it. That your editors will say, look, let's not report this. It won't be good for us. We'll get into trouble with the ruling party, whatever. If that happens, then we all suffer, because then these, they say sunlight is the best disinfectant. You are the sunlight. And if you don't bring that sunlight to bear on some of these things that need disinfecting, the infection will spread.
So very last quick one before we wrap up, which we discussed with Rana before, that it seems like there is an incentive within the political system for Islamophobia, for Muslim hate speech, and we saw during this election 110 of 170 speeches given by the Prime Minister had Islamophobia and hate speech, and of course, there's destruction of masjids, of people, and so how do we change the incentive structure? If people are giving speeches like this and demolishing mosques, and then they're rewarded during elections, as we see now and in the past, because I think the key thing is whether you're in Bihar or you're in Kerala or you're in Punjab, everyone says hum milte julte hum sab ठीक रहते हैं, हम खुशी से रहते हैं, and they always blame the politicians. They always say the reason we have hatred, the reason we fight is because they divide us for the purposes of votes, like the British did. Now we see this happening with the ruling party. So I wanted to find, last thing, get at the foundation of the incentives of why politicians do this, and they, I think, are the main reason why we have issues with Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb. Leave that with the last quote.
Well, my argument to the friends of in the ruling party is that they did far better when they had an economic development message than when they had a bigot message. Look at the results, right? I mean, when they were arguing that they were going to transform India into Gujarat, and the CEO of Gujarat Inc. was going to make India into a prosperous country, they got far more seats than when they went around saying कि ये मुसलमान आके मंगलसूत्र छीन लेंगे आपकी बात, right? I mean, that they got them fewer seats. So learn the lesson that it's actually better to actually appeal to what benefits everybody. I mean, the Prime Minister was very proud of the fact that not one of his social welfare schemes has been implemented with regard to the religion of the beneficiary. He points out that if he, gives toilets to a village, the Muslim homes benefit as well. If he gives, LED light bulbs or cooking gas connections, the Muslims get it too. So he says that. He says, I'm not a discriminator. But then why try and get votes on the basis of this? Especially if you don't get as many seats from this kind of campaign as you got from the other kinds. That's the message to give them, but ultimately they will do what they think is best for the community. We just have to play our own part in offering alternative ways to achieve the same result. It's been great talking to you all. I think we really will have to wrap up. Thank you very much.
As Kabir ji said, जो कहे सो जाने नहीं और जो जाने सो कहे नहीं. I'm pretty sure आप सबके पास कुछ ना कुछ पहलू के लिए अपने कुछ पहेलियाँ होंगी या कोई भी जो इवेंट्स होंगे आपकी खुद की लाइफ से पहल जो आपने किए होंगे. But we'll now close our discussion here, and for the closing ceremony I would call Anmesh ji to come and Ankush ji here to talk about it.
If you could just for a couple of moments. Sure.
यूं ही पहलू में बैठे रहे.
And by the way, Ankush Bhai was the one who came up with Pehlu. He had the brilliant idea some months ago to do this. So
Your translation was debatable.
I took it from Ankush Bhai and Dhruv. The translation.
I have idea for the next composition. I come from Amritsar, and मुझे कभी अपने अमृतसरी होने का पूरा एहसास होता नहीं जब तक मैं दूसरे के बारे में लाहौरियों के बारे में ना सोचूं. और I was told about Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb when I came to Delhi, but I felt it much earlier when I was in Amritsar. तो perhaps हमारे गंगा-जमुनी तो जमुना तो यहाँ पे है, पर हमारे पंजाब के भी 5 दरियाएं which have been divided between 2 countries. और तीन हैं, और साउथ एशिया के पूरे वैसे और कितने कल्चरल और सिविलाइजेशनल एलिमेंट्स हैं जो डिवाइडेड हैं. तो कहीं ना कहीं और बड़े सारे ऐसे एलिमेंट्स हैं और पूरे साउथ एशिया के हैं. एंड वी नीड टू परहैप्स एक्सपैंड द डायलॉग ऑफ पहलू टू आवर सिविलाइजेशनल मेमोरी एंड साउथ एशिया. सो for next round of talks. And again, this is not my place to thank, because everything was organized by Avnesh and his team at Contemporary Marketing, and I'd request him to close the evening. Thank everybody, and
ऐसी महफिलें करते रहिए.
So thank you so much. Namaskar and Adab. My name is Avnesh. I represent Contemporary Marketing. As the name speaks for itself, we are a marketing firm. Why are we here at this evening? For this evening, marketing at its core is about stories. Stories that we create, stories that we listen to, and stories that we want to leave back. हम अक्सर कंप्यूटर के आगे पूरा टाइम बैठे रहते हैं, रियलाइज नहीं होता ऐसे बहुत हज़ारों लाखों कहानियाँ हैं जो हम मिस कर रहे हैं. But thanks to both of you for coming here tonight. I will not take much of your time if you already past the time that we had decided. But thanks a lot everyone who has joined us here this evening. It was lovely listening to both of you, and I would also like to thank all the partners. We have Manzil Mystics, we have NI, we have of course now the star Dhruv isn't here. He's helped us plan this completely.
CRCI.
And of course CRCI and each and every, and the Queen for partnering with us. Thank you so much. And lovely having you all. Have a very, very good evening, and see you very soon. I just need to give us